Could a possible solution be exposing these species to wild mammals and birds as possible food sources, who might then teach their young to view these invasive species as food?
Yeah, I just don't know exactly how you would do that. I mean, there's right now on the invasive species regulation list, there's some 170 odd species. I'm not sure how you would train wild animals to view those as sources of food. Invasive species, both terrestrial and aquatic, because we also have them on land around the world, they displace these other species, and this is a wild ecosystem that you're introducing these species into. And so I just don't know what mechanism you could use to train wild species to start seeing these as food sources. Yeah.
I do have another question here that perhaps is an opportunity for Milan to give a bit of insight as to how the office reports its audits. But the question that's being asked is whether there's a particular reason that certain substances are specifically named in the introduction to the mining effluent section of the report. And the point that's being made is that two of the three substances that are named as being harmful to fish are actually nutrients that are essential to life. So I'll leave that one up to you.
It would be great to know which substances. Do you remember which substances we named? So the thing is that while a substance can be vital to life, if there's too much of it, let's say nitrogen, which is vital, if you have too much of it in a system that shouldn't have it there normally, you can have environmental effects. So, and this can have effects on the fish or other species in that area. You know, carbon dioxide is part of what we use on life on the planet, and too much of it is a problem. So too much of any particular nutrient can be a problem, is what I would say.
And often when we refer to certain, we give examples. So we're trying to give examples of, in this case, substances that were a part of the process, that are in the process of the chemical process, which creates effluent and the discharge of effluent. So,
yeah.
Another question on mining. We are being asked by one of our participants about the source of the finding where we say that Environment and Climate Change Canada addressed violations of regulations at metal and non-metal mine sites, given that the limit for deleterious substances is 0 for non-metal mines, and many mines release deleterious substances at various levels, yet there were very few prosecutions and convictions. Was there any determination made during the audit if this enforcement regime was effective in protecting fish under the Act?
Okay, I think, Milan, you're going to have to help me with that. That's a level of detail below what I'm usually privy to.
We looked at the allegations and the court actions and that were in place during our audit. During about 4.5 years or so, there was about $16.5 million in fines that were levied against the companies by the firms. And as we say in the report, they ranged from 10,000 to as large as 7.5 million. We also noticed that the size of these fines were increasing over time. Now there's a few other things we can add here. So first of all, the federal government it has a role in enforcement. There's also the provincial government that also does some of the enforcement, and some fines are levied at that level also. So there's some coordination of this. So the coordination between the provincial, territorial, and federal governments. The fact that there are no proactive inspections of non-metal mines, but there are reactive, reactive inspections also, which happen as a result of spills. So a company, and we've seen many cases where companies will self-identify there's a spill, or the spill will be identified by stakeholders, the public, and then the department determines whether they need to investigate depending on a case-by-case basis. So the additional investigation is done on a reactive basis.
So this is an important question, and it's one that we get asked often, so I'm going to get you to cover the same ground in English for the benefit of our English-speaking audience. The question that was asked in French was about whether there was any way to force departments to fix the problems that you raise in your audits, and if so, is there a time frame tied to that?
So there's no, I don't carry a big stick that forces the departments to implement my recommendations. The way it works is that Parliament, members of Parliament, pass laws and regulations that the civil service, the government, must then implement. As an auditor, my role is to go into the government to see whether or not they are actually achieving the rules and regulations that Parliament has set, and I report back to Parliament. So my recommendations are discussed and dealt with by the departments. They say yes or no, and my reports go to Parliament. Parliament then holds the departments to account. And so what they can do is call those departments to committees, for example, and ask for action plans and ask, what are you doing about the commissioner's recommendations? That's the role Parliament can play. In terms of a member of the public, one thing that members of the public can do is participate in the office's petition process. It's part of the law that was that when the commissioner was created. Any Canadian can send in a question on any issue related to federal environment and sustainable development issues, and the minister must respond within 120 days. So I would encourage you to go to our website, have a look at our petitions section, and this is a way to get an answer from a federal minister. I don't know if any of you have written ministers before. You often just get a letter that says, thank you very much for your letter, and we'll look at it. In this case, when you send the letter through our office, the ministers must respond within 120 days.
Thank you. Going now back to inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, the question is that in addition to developing a definition of these inefficient subsidies, in your view, what would be the most critical elements that would indicate that the government and relevant departments are effectively addressing this issue?
So yes, they have to define inefficient. And then the second thing they have to do is an exhaustive inventory of potential subsidies. And here I would be talking about any and all mechanisms, any and all grants, contributions. One parliamentarian even suggested that we consider the lack of regulation to be a potential subsidy. So if you're not regulating them, you're actually giving them a break because you're not regulating them, which I thought was an interesting concept. So they need to define what a subsidy is. They definitely need to define what inefficient is. They need to do a deep dive and have a very exhaustive list of all the subsidies all the things that they might consider to be subsidies. Once you have that list, then you have to look at them from both environmental, social, and economic perspective, decide whether or not they're inefficient, and reduce those inefficient fossil fuel subsidies to zero by 2025. That's what I think needs to be done. Pretty much.
Yeah. Perhaps I would add that, once this is done, an important thing that they need to do is to assess those,
Yes.
measures to determine whether they are actually subsidies and whether they are inefficient. And these assessments, and this is something that we say in our report, have to be based on evidence. And evidence has to be considered for the three pillars of sustainable development, the economic pillar, the environmental pillar, and the social pillar. And they have to be brought together to weigh, let's call it the costs and benefits, and see where that leads us, in the long term, to determine whether that measure is viable or not, and having future generations in mind. So that would be an important point that I would raise.
So that's the end of our questions from participants. Nous sommes arrivés au bout des questions de nos participants. However, you mentioned in your opening remarks, Julie, that you will be leaving the position in a few months, and I was wondering if you have any words of wisdom you wish to share, perhaps the highest high, the lowest low, the way forward, anything that you would like to tell the world as you come to the end of this time in this position?
Well, that's a big question. One of our highs has been definitely working on the climate change file and doing the collaborative audit that we did on climate change with the provincial and territorial auditors generals. That was definitely a high. Having an impact in terms of the sustainable development goals and starting to audit those was definitely another high. I can't really think of any lows. This office, if you're a young person, please consider coming to work here. If you're intellectually curious, this is a great office to work in, and you get to do a master's degree every year. The staff at the OAG, the teams that I have are incredible. Smart, professional, sophisticated, detail-oriented. You can't imagine. So I'm going to be thanking everybody here, the whole office, the audit teams, all the services. It's been an awesome honor, and I hope I've done a good job to get these audits into the public domain. Even these webinars was a new thing for us, and we've enjoyed doing them, and we hope to do more of them in the future. So, keep reading our reports. Pay attention to them, ask questions, send in petitions, and talk to your members of parliament. That's the best thing you can do as a citizen.